Hi, friends. I'm Noelle D'Amico from the Workers Circle. We are so glad to be back for year two of How to Be an Effective Advocate from Your Hometown. We want to welcome back everybody who was with us last year. And we also are doing a little change up in the format. So every month with Effective Advocate, you're going to get a taste of federal advocacy, a model of state advocacy, and a skills building unit, which will change over time. And sometimes we may just do skills building. We've had a lot of feedback from folks that say, we want to tool up, we are raring to go, and we want to make sure that we do the most effective things at the right times. And so in response to that, we've tweaked our effective advocate for this year, but we are so glad that you are here because, you can feel this sense of doom and the onslaught of all of the things that have been happening since day one of Donald Trump's presidency. However, I want to remind you, we the people are the bulwark of our democracy. And where these executive orders and all kinds of changes ultimately hit the ground is in your hometown. Your relationships with your neighbors, with grassroots organizations, with immigrant rights groups, with voting rights groups, with the people who are in need that are utilizing food pantries or looking for clothes, your relationships with LGBTQI folks and organizations supporting their rights, those relationships are paramount right now because at the end of the day, it all comes down to what we do where we live. Let me turn it back to Andrea. Look at all of these folks still coming in. We actually we reached 900 in the registration tonight, which is really, it's such a good sign. Isn't it good to know you're not alone out there? We're in this together and we are powerful.
And we certainly are. And one of the other really important things that you will be able to do with what we are showing you is begin to build a relationship with your elected officials. So much of life is all about relationships. And you would be amazed as you build your relationships, whether your elected is a Democrat or Republican, not a party person at all, what your relationship will mean in terms of gaining their support on something that's really important to you. So, Noelle, I'm going to kick it back over to you so
Absolutely.
you can get us started.
Well, let's get going. Welcome again, everyone. And we'll go to the next slide where you'll have an overview of what we're covering tonight. We're going to have a first section on new legislation that has been introduced and is moving at breakneck speed through the House. It's called the SAVE Act, but it's not something good. It's something we want to oppose. It's called this very fancy name, Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. It's really not about that. Jay Falk from the Worker Circle is going to take us through in just a moment. We'll then move to a model approach at the state level that you can think about, how could I emulate this in my state? We're going to look at the Virginia constitutional amendments. And then third, we're going to be talking about how to make an impactful legislative visit. Now, why have we chosen this skill at this moment? Because a lot of state legislatures are open right now, and they're ready to receive advocates like yourself. So we wanted to be sure to kick off by starting with this skill, but in future sessions, there will be other skills that we're covering. With that, let me kick it right over to Jay. Jay, take it away and tell us about the SAVE Act.
Hi everyone. Like Noelle mentioned, my name is Jay Falk and I am the social justice organizer for the Worker Circle based in Washington, D.C. And in that role, I do our Hill advocacy. And right now we are really laser focused on the SAVE Act. As Noelle mentioned, it stands for the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, which is really a misnomer. This bill could have devastating impacts on our freedom to vote, and we think it might be coming up in the House of Representatives as early as next week. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this bill is, why it was introduced, and how you can fight it from your hometown. So the SAVE Act is based on a myth that you've probably heard repeated in your hometown on social media. And that myth is that non-citizens are voting and they're impacting our elections. Now that's a myth. There has been really comprehensive research by left-wing institutions, by nonpartisan institutions, by even right-wing institutions on whether or not non-citizen voting is even happening. And the reality is it's not. It's a myth. It's vanishingly rare. It's almost statistically insignificant. But its impact, this myth's impact on voters is real. And you've heard it during the election cycle. So if you can go to the next slide, you probably have seen on social media right-wing grifters and politicians and pundits talking about the threat of non-citizen voting. And now that we have reached the time post-election, those elected officials who have been repeating this myth are taking that myth to Congress with the SAVE Act. So what does the SAVE Act do? The SAVE Act is pretty simple. It requires that all Americans show either a birth certificate or a passport in order to register to vote. It also involves list maintenance requirements. So if you've been voting for 20 years, 15 years, and you've never re-registered to vote, you may have to re-register to vote and show a birth certificate or passport. And what could happen is you could show up to the polls without realizing that your voter registration has been purged because you did not originally show a birth certificate or passport to register to vote. You can already imagine what are some of the negative impacts of this bill, but we're going to talk a little bit more about them in detail. 146 million American citizens, eligible voters, do not own a passport. It's a little bit less than half of America. This is going to affect you. It's going to affect your neighbors. What we found in the research is about the folks who are most likely to not have a passport are elderly Americans. So this bill really targets elderly Americans who may not travel out of the country frequently, who may have had a passport in the past, but haven't traveled for some time. This bill requires one of two forms of identification, either a passport or a birth certificate. Problem is, as many of you know, birth certificates are often hidden away in filing documents. For students, they may be with their families, not many states away, but also 68 million women change their names over their lifetime, most when they get married. And for those 68 million women, their names do not match the name on their birth certificate. For all of those women, they would not be able to use their birth certificate in order to register to vote. So this is a huge challenge. It's a bill that's intended to stop people from voting. And in fact, it's a bill that's been tried and tested in Republican states as voter suppression. And they found that it was so impactful at stopping eligible voters from voting that even Republicans in some of those states were opposed ultimately to the bill. But it's rearing its head in Congress now because of the myth of non-citizen voting. And we really need to be ready to talk to our legislators, to talk to our representatives and our senators, and make sure that they understand this is a nonpartisan bill that will affect all, that will suppress all, and that will really degrade the quality of our democracy. So what can you do, right? Like what is possible? This is about an effective advocate. What can we do right now to stop this bad bill that's in Congress right now? Well, the first thing you can do is we have a really easy way to email your senators and your representatives. We're going to throw this link in the chat, and you can go ahead and click that link. It takes like 5 clicks, and it will help you send a letter to your representatives. The second thing you can do if you want to take a little bit more action that will have a little bit more impact is reach out and try to schedule a constituent meeting with your senators or representatives. Especially in some key states, we really want to make sure that we are reaching out to both Republicans and Democrats, senators and representatives. It's in the House of Representatives now. We think it will probably end up in the Senate soon. So we want to make sure that we are having those direct contacts. Your legislators need to know that you as constituents are very worried about this bill. And the final thing you can do is bring more people into this fight, educate them about this bill. If you can send them this link in order to send letters themselves to their representatives, that's wonderful. But also make sure that they're educated and they're fired up and ready so that when their legislators do support this bill, they know that they can't support them in the future.
Jay, thank you so much. I want to start off a short period of question and answer. I heard that with this bill, that you can be purged without knowing it. Is there not a requirement? I mean, I know this has been a problem in the past with some legislation where people can be removed from the voting rolls and not know it until they show up. Is that the case with the SAVE Act?
That's the case. It's really going to come down to how it's implemented. Part of the problem with this bill is it's really, really specific, but it's also unclear in the bill language exactly how states are going to be asked to enforce it. And what that's going to mean is that states that have legislators who are in favor of voter suppression are going to take the most stringent view on this bill, and they are going to purge voters, and they are going to make it as challenging as possible to show up and vote.
Thanks for mentioning that. I know that some elderly citizens also, especially people in rural areas or of older generations, may have trouble accessing, or maybe they never even had a birth certificate in some instances. So this is a very serious bill that will impact senior citizens in our country. I see there's a question from Terry Nicoletti. Is there anything I can do as a resident of DC? And you know what? We're all working on DC statehood, but in the meantime, Jay, what can Terry do?
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing is I'm also a resident of Washington, D.C., and there is stuff you can do. The first power that we have in Washington, D.C. is that we are very close to the members of Congress, even though we only have one who represents us and she's unvoting. The entirety of Congress is right down the road from us. So what you can do is please reach out to me if you want to be involved. I would be more than happy to work with you and involve you in any in-person actions that we're going to do on Capitol Hill. We are regularly scheduling meetings with legislators from all 50 states to talk about this bill on behalf of the Workers' Circle. And you know, it's very hard to come from North Carolina to visit, so we often do those in-person visits on behalf of those constituents. So if you're interested in that, you're more than welcome to come with me and reach out to do that. The second thing you can do is you can reach out to your representatives. And frankly, you also are more than welcome to reach out to any of the representatives and senators and say that you're a resident of Washington, D.C. and that you don't have representation. You know, you're not one of their constituents, but you are an American who has a voice. And we really just want to increase the number of people that these representatives and senators are hearing from. You know, you're one of many emails, and that boosts the visibility of this issue to the senators and representatives, whether or not you're a constituent.
We're going to do 2 more questions really quickly, and then we'll try to answer the remainder in the chat so that we can move forward to see the Virginia constitutional amendments. But Jay, there's a question in the chat. I've read this act, but couldn't find out what happens if your current last name doesn't match the last name on your birth certificate. How would that be rectified? That's one of the problems. And then the other question is, would this override state regulations revoting?
That's a great question. So the first answer is that you could go ahead and get your birth certificate name changed. I'm not exactly sure what the process is involved. I'm sure it is quite involved. If anyone here has changed their name when they got married and gone through just that legal process, they know it could be very involved. But the short answer is, if you do not have the right name on your birth certificate and this bill gets passed, and let me be clear, this bill has not been passed yet, so these are not the regulations now, then you would not be able to use your birth certificate in order to register to vote. So you would have to get a passport, and if you didn't have that, then you would be one of the people that this bill is successfully suppressing. And I hope that everyone in this room is committed enough to voting that they would fight against that and make sure that they got their records in check and all that. But you can imagine how effortful that might be in people who maybe don't have the time or the money to kind of pursue it. and that their votes would be suppressed. And then Noelle, can you repeat the second question?
The second question is, would this override state laws?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit more complicated than override. What it does is create a bifurcated system. States are allowed to create their own voter registration and voter ID laws for state and local elections, but they're not allowed to do that for federal elections. So these are the requirements that would be put in place for all federal elections. And if states wanted to create different rules for their state elections, it would make it a little bit complicated to do that. So you might have a situation like in Arizona, which is actually what they have now, where Arizona has more stringent voter ID requirements than federal elections allow. And so people are sometimes, when they register to vote, marked as federal only voters, meaning they can only vote in federal elections and they're not allowed to vote in state elections. So it would create that same situation where you might be allowed to vote in state elections, but not in federal elections. I know that's complicated, but.
Thanks so much, Jay. We're going to go and address the rest of the questions in the chat as best we can and turn it over now. Thank you so much to Andrew Miller, who's going to give us an example of what the wonderful state of Virginia is doing right now. Take it away, Andrea.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Noelle. I wanted everybody to have a sense of what the Virginia General Assembly looks like. It is, as you can see from the slide, the House of Delegates is 51 Dems and 48 GOP, and our Senate is 21 Dems to 19 GOP. So our General Assembly, the Dems are in the majority. Next slide. We are introducing a constitutional amendment making voting a fundamental right, which will overturn felony disenfranchisement in Virginia. In 1902, Virginia modified her constitution, and it said anyone with a felony conviction would only be able to vote if the governor, one person in all of humanity, if the governor restored their right to vote. Now, in Virginia, to change our constitution, we must pass this bill twice through our legislature, and then it would go to the citizens as a ballot amendment. Now, Virginia has a Democratic General Assembly, but all of our executive officers are Republican. For a constitutional amendment, because it is an amendment for the people, the governor has no standing. So it doesn't matter that our governor would be against this bill. We would still be able to pass it through our legislature on a simple majority vote. So there's a Senate bill, there's a House bill. Now, in most legislatures, if you have both a Senate and a House, an upper and a lower chamber, there's a process called crossing over, where a bill passes one chamber and then it crosses over to be voted and accepted by the other chamber. So, yes. Now, this bill says that once a person is released from incarceration, they will be able to register to vote. Now, unlike Florida, who did this, but did not state that merely release from prison would give you the ability to register to vote, this protects people by very clearly saying without further action required. Now, there were people who made arguments against this, And it was really rather bemusing to watch, where the legislator who introduced the bill said, "Excuse me, but we currently have a person convicted of multiple felonies who not only voted in the presidential election, he became president." And that pretty much ended the arguments. Next slide. Making a legislative visit. Well, before I go on, are there any other questions? So we are like in constitutional amendments in Virginia right now. All right, it looks relatively quiet. Making a legislative visit. I love this part. I was on Capitol Hill from 2009 to basically 2019. So when you were going to visit your legislature tour, and now we're assuming that you're not necessarily going to DC, some of you may, and I know we've got DC people here. You're going to want to make sure you know who is your legislator, because that is going to be, I'm going to say, one of the first people that you want to see. Because I led a team on the Hill. I might visit, we might visit 50 slow day to 140 people in the house. Good day. Now, you will get these links when you receive your after meeting email from us. If you are looking for your House member, you can go to house.gov/representatives, find your representatives. And there is a similar link for the Senate in senate.gov. All right, now, a quick civics lesson. Everyone has one US House member, but you have two senators. You can most definitely contact both senators. Next slide. Now, finding your state legislators. What I'm going to do is introduce you to a program called BillTrack50.com. This will allow you to find legislators in any state. And once you look up who the legislators are in your state, the rules in the state, most people visit their legislators and they go in teams and they visit a number of other legislators. So I'm getting around sending you to your individual legislative information service. So you can go into Virginia, search legislators, click search, and all the legislators are going to come up. All right, next slide. And you'll get my email. Anyone who wants to do state legislative visits, my email will be in there. You can email me, and I will be more than happy to get you an account on BillTrack50, and we can teach you how to use it. So we have a lot of people here. I am assuming you're going to be doing this not only for yourself personally, but for friends, organizations, your neighbors. You're going to want to get together and be effective. With BillTrack50, we're going to be seeing a lot of bad legislation. BillTrack50 also does federal legislation. You will be able to search and then get a list of all the bills that have been introduced. Now, these are the constitutional amendments in Virginia that we are interested in. And now you can see, not only do you get the bill number, but the name of the bills were really, really long. So I wanted you to be able to see the progress column. Crossover means these H bills, they were in the House. They have now gone over to the Senate. There are some bills that are in committee, and when you look at the last action, if it says the bill was left, that bill is not really, it didn't make it out of committee. It's not going to get a vote this year. And then when you look down at some of the other bills, it says it was introduced and referred to a committee. They haven't really taken any action on it yet. We will do some training and teach you how to use this. We will make Bill Track 50 available to you for free. Next slide. Now, you are lobbying members of Congress, your state legislators, this could even be your city, county officials. You want to influence them, you want to persuade them, you want to pressure them. And all I can say is you need to be consistent and persistent. Asking once is not going to necessarily get you the result you need. You are going to need to ask again and again, and you're going to need to bring your friends. Next slide. Now, what's effective advocacy? Well, you take someone who had started off by saying no, they disagree with your position, and you turn it into maybe. If somebody is, well, let me think about it, you're going to be working to turn that into a yes. If you have a supportive legislator, remember, your visits are very infrequent. They work with their other members on a daily basis. So you want to turn their yes into, can I help build support? Because they see their colleagues almost every day. Next slide. Noelle, why are we doing this?
Well, we're doing this because, believe it or not, friends, you might feel you're just one person, but you're one voter. You're one constituent. And guess what? You know a lot of people as well. You're connected to a lot of people. And your voice matters. It's not just, oh, we want you to vote against the SAVE Act. It's why you want them to vote against the SAVE Act. And this is where your own personal story comes into play. Perhaps you're an older person who has difficulty putting their hands on their birth certificate, or you're a college student who's in college and can't easily get to a birth certificate, or perhaps you're someone who's changed your name and are also facing this problem. You can speak in your own voice about how this bill would affect you and millions of other Americans. You can also, if you don't feel you want to talk from a personal experience standpoint, you can talk from the values that you hold. Some of you know immediately these are the values. They may be driven by your upbringing, by your culture, by your faith, by the kind of America that you believe in. That's where you dig deep. How might your values lead you to be in front of that legislative day? And then make that argument. Perhaps you have seen people already impacted by voter suppression, and you don't want people going to the polls only to discover that they don't know that they've been purged. And you might be able to give another example of a bill perhaps that did that, and this is similar kind of behavior. You don't want to see that happen. But again, even direct experience is not necessary. Perhaps you're a person of faith and you believe that God respects every single one of us, that we were created in dignity, and that we need to ensure that every single person's voice is heard, and that that's a very important part, not only of your faith, but also about what it means to be an American citizen. And this bill would directly threaten that. So one of the things that legislators are always looking for are these stories that they can tell in order to bring power and bring more people onto the bill or work to block a bill. And so when you share these stories and about yourself, about your values, about your experience, These stories become part of a repertoire that then your lawmakers can use to advocate. Your stories are important public examples. Now, we're going to walk you through, of course, how to make a legislative visit. We just sort of told you some of the essentials. You can do that on your own. You can gather people from your school, from your house of worship, from the club that you belong to. Heck, if you're part of a dog walkers club and you've got people fired up about this and you're all in the same district, you can make a visit together. Some people were saying, hey, can we make a visit in the name of the Center for Common Ground or in the name of the Workers Circle? If you want to just let us know that you're going to go in there and talk about this bill and your opposition to it. We'd love to help you. But remember, you can actually set these meetings up yourself in your hometown. Let's go to the next slide. The foundation, of course, is that you're building relationships. That's the important part. As Andrea said, it's not one and done with legislative advocacy. It is not only okay, it's recommended. You go back over and over on the same legislation or similar legislation. That's how they get to know you. It's how you build a relationship with your elected leaders, so that at some point they might say, look, it's Marcy again. Oh, I'm so glad you came. What do you think about this, Marcy? You can actually get to that point with some of your lawmakers. Now, not every lawmaker is going to agree with you, right? In fact, some are going to be vehemently in support of the SAVE Act. Some of you have senators and members of the House who absolutely would go to the mat to make sure the SAVE Act pays. Well, don't worry, we're going to role play such an example in just a minute. But what you want to do when you make a visit, it's important to still visit these people. Why? Remember the earlier slide. You want to be able to turn a maybe into, in this instance, a no, right? And maybe a yes even into a no in this instance. You want to also, your information gathering. Remember, again, not one visit and done, but you're going in, and as you're conversing with the lawmaker, you're listening. What is this person saying to me? What is the worldview that they hold? What are the most important priorities to them? Let me tell you, lawmakers as well as legislative aides, they love to talk. So you can let them go for a little bit and you can listen to how they're describing what's of paramount importance to them. And then you can try to make your argument either live based on that framework of values or top priorities that they're holding, or you can come back or follow up with a letter, with an email, with a second visit in order to try to push them forward. So whenever you're meeting with a legislator, I don't want you to think you're necessarily going to convert them in the first time. Rather, think of it as developing a relationship. And especially, it's important, do not give up on those with whom you disagree. Keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing. Don't take your foot off the gas or we will never get there. So we're dependent on all you folks that have members of Congress who are really down for the SAVE Act. We're counting on your fortitude to go in with respect, to go in with your values, to go in with your determination and meet with these folks. Now, next slide. Sometimes you're going to go in there and you're not going to get to meet with your member of Congress. Please do not be disappointed. Remember, the aides that work in that office have a lot of power. They often dictate what makes it to the top of the priority list. They advise all of the elected representatives. It is not a wasted meeting to meet with, for goodness sake, a legislative director. That's a pretty high hit. But even if it's a lower level staff member, you have the opportunity to make your case, and they have the responsibility to communicate to their lawmaker that they've heard from their constituent. It's okay. Don't worry. Just get in there and start visiting. So how do you get to set up a meeting? Well, you heard Jay at the beginning, gosh, if you want to come to Washington, you want to make a visit, it's feeling overwhelming, give me a a call, we'll help you out. Absolutely. I'm sure Center of Common Ground is happy to help you out as well. But what we want you to learn how to do is how do you do it for yourself where you live? So first of all, you figure out using the website, where is your local member of Congress's office? They're somewhere in the district. They might be in a strip mall. They might be down the street from the McDonald's. For all you know, they're around the corner from your church. You want to identify where that office is. You want to make an official request in email and then follow up with a phone call. And you say, hi, my name is Noelle, and I wrote with a request to meet Representative so-and-so about the SAVE Act. I'm wondering if you've received that request because I haven't yet heard back from you. You know, give them a beat. Let them get a day or two under their belt before you start calling, because they do often get a lot of requests. But typically what you should expect is a very respectful person to let you know when the next opportunity to make a visit is. These are ordinary people, folks. These are not people who are, you know, tabernacles of wisdom on high. They are ordinary people like you and me, and it's their job to ensure that constituents interact with the lawmaker. Now, we're encouraging you to meet, if possible, in person in the district office, but you can also set up a meeting by Zoom. Sometimes that works out easier for you and easier for the lawmaker or the aides. One other thing we're suggesting, look, you can go in yourself, but we're going to send you resources that you can use and customize. Maybe you make a letter, right? And you're at the PTA meeting and you're talking with other people, and you find out there's a lot of people that are quite worried about the SAVE Act. Well, you can have them sign on with their name and their official address. And then when you go to that meeting, even if you don't have 20 people with you, you might have 20 signatures on that letter of constituents in the lawmaker's district. So that's another way to increase your impact. Next slide. Once you've had your meeting and you're following up, you want to be sure, first of all, to thank the legislator for meeting with you. You want to send a written note, typically email. It's easy, it gets there quickly. And in that email, you can recapitulate your arguments. You can make them again in very brief form. Perhaps during the meeting, they've asked you, gee, I want to know X, Y, or Z about the SAVE Act, and you don't know the answer. Rule number one, never make it up. It is okay not to know something. You are not coming as a policy expert. You're coming as a constituent, as a citizen. So it's perfectly fine to say, that's a very good question. Let me find out the answer to that, and I'll get back to you promptly. And then you go find out the answer. Maybe you give Andrea an email, or you send an email to Jay, or you look up whatever it is, but be diligent about that. Don't get yourself in hot water by saying something that you're not confident about. Remember, you can stand on your own 2 feet. You can advocate from your values. Don't worry if you don't know the answer to something, but in the email follow-up, that's a great place to attach additional information. The other thing is, when you're leaving that meeting, you want to say, what else can we do here? So for example, if you find your lawmaker agrees with you and says, that's right, we do have to stop the SAVE Act, the next question is, what else can I do to help? It's fine to say that, and you'll be surprised. Lawmakers will often tell you exactly what they need, or they might say, I'm going to refer you over to Jose, who's going to follow up with you. I know he's trying to reach people in this area about this particular part of the bill. Maybe you guys could be helpful with that, but it's a way to show you are willing to do some work in order to make sure that this bill is stopped. And again, even if you disagree, in all things, including the follow-up email, always try to find some common ground. You may disagree vehemently on this, but perhaps the lawmaker has said something of value that you agree with, anything that you can hang your hat on to try to just get a little toehold. That will help you in future when you go back again. Next slide. All right. So we are at it. Before we go to the role play, though, I just want to make sure that we're not missing any questions in the chat about some of what we've shared so far. I'm looking right now. Andrea, are you seeing anything in here?
I've been
Oh,
answering questions. I've been
perfect.
watching the chat. So yes. Now we
Awesome.
do have a good question. Is it effective to reach out to Dem leadership, Jeffries and Schumer? The answer to that is yes. Now there are leaders and there are whips. So anyone that is in a leadership position, caucus chairs, all those folks, committee members and committee chairs, all those folks are very, very important touch points.
All right. I'm seeing a question here about whether it's more effective to leave a phone message or send them an email. The senator's phone line went to a scratchy voicemail. You know, you can reach out in both ways. If you're not getting somewhere with one vehicle, don't hesitate to try the other. Many congressional offices use an email form in order to make a request for the meeting. Now, what I do want to be clear of, this bill right now is moving in the House. It hasn't yet been introduced into the Senate. So if you're visiting on the SAVE Act, where you want to concentrate right now, because we think the vote is coming as quickly as February 3rd. Now, things can change, but it could be as quick as February 3rd, is you want to reach out as quickly as you can to your member of Congress, to your representative from the House. Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm going to bring Jay back on. And this time, I remember last year, Andrea played a member of Congress. And this time, I'm going to get to play a member of Congress. And I'm choosing Representative John Curtis from Utah, who is a co-sponsor of the SAVE Act. And Jay, how are you coming to visit?
Well, thank you so much, Representative, for meeting with me. As you know, I'm a constituent in your district, and I have a group of constituents here with me, and we're really excited to talk to you about a bill that we're really concerned about, that we know is coming down, and you're going to have a chance to vote on it really soon.
Oh, well, what bill would that be that you're concerned about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bill we're concerned about is HR 22.
Oh, well, I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. I really think it's imperative that we secure our elections. You know, there are millions of illegals flooding over the border, and some of them are settling right here in Utah. And what I'm very worried about is ordinary American citizens are not able to have their voices heard. In fact, their voices are being drowned out by all of these non-citizens who are getting in there by hook or crook. I think there are Democrats out there that are bringing some of these people in. Who knows if they even live in Utah? It is imperative that we stop this. So I can't quite understand what kind of concern you would have with protecting the election integrity in our nation.
Yeah, well, with respect, Representative, I'm very concerned as a constituent, as a voter who has voted for the last 20 years. I'm actually worried that this bill could impact me and my family.
But
Um,
it's not about you and your family. It's about stopping non-citizen voting. What do you mean it would be about you and your family?
yeah, well, actually, the bill requires that you must show a passport
Mhm.
or birth certificate in order to register to vote. For me,
Absolutely. Yeah.
passport is just too expensive and I don't travel. So I don't have a passport. And when I got married, I changed my name. So I don't have a birth certificate in my new name either. Now, I've been an American citizen my entire life. I was born here in Utah, and this bill is going to make it impossible for me to register to vote if it passes. So I'm very worried that it's going to affect me and people like me throughout your constituency.
Well, you're saying that you think you won't be able to vote because of this bill, but doesn't that just, that's just a little change. Why don't you go down? You should really, it's very important that you keep your documents up to date.
Well, in my community, I have plenty of friends who have the same problem as me, and our right to vote is one of our most fundamental freedoms. It's essential that everyone get a chance to exercise their right. If this bill suppresses even one American who should be eligible to vote, it's one too many. And I've been discussing it with members of my community and my church, and they're also very concerned. We all,
Oh, what church do you go to?
oh, well, I go to All Souls Unitarian.
Oh, you do? I think that's down the road from my church. I'm
Yeah,
not
do you know
sure.
Pastor Rick?
I've met Pastor Rick. I can't say that I agree with him on many things. He spent some time in this office, but I'm glad to know you're going to church.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, this is a big concern among all of our congregation. We've been talking about it during after Sunday services. So I think you'll find it's something that lots of Christians are concerned about. You know, we're Americans, we're patriotic. We really believe the importance of voting as a civic duty, and this is something that will take that away from many of us.
Well, I like that you think of voting as a civic duty. It is indeed a civic duty, and too many Americans treat it lightly. So that's something on which we certainly agree. I need to be frank with you, Jay. I think you can tell that I'm probably unlikely to withdraw as a co-sponsor from this bill. I mean, I have already put my good name down. I was advised by my legislative staff. I appreciate your coming in. Um, and I will take your concerns into account, but I'm sure in the implementation of this bill, at each state, we've given a lot of freedom. And certainly here in Utah, we're going to make sure that people who are American citizens can vote.
Yeah. Well, have you spoken to some of your colleagues from Kansas? Some of the Republicans on your side of the aisle are actually opposing this bill because they implemented a form of this bill in their state, and it suppressed many of their voters from showing out to do their civic duty. Have you talked to any of your colleagues from Kansas on the bill?
Well, I can't say that I have, but that's very interesting. I'll certainly caucus with those folks from Kansas. I know they're trying to do a lot of things right in Kansas, but I do have a concern about that. And I thank you for bringing that to my attention. Now, I'm so sorry, but I have a number of meetings that I have to get to that are going to take my attention. Thank you very much for coming in and making a visit.
Well, thank you very much for taking time to listen to us. And I hope you'll consider that this is a priority issue for so many of us in your district. And it's something we'll be deciding our votes on in November.
Thank you. All right. So here we go. We're going to give a round to Jay. Way to keep going. I decided to make the member of Congress far more aggressive than you're likely to find, just because you can be ready. You know, some of these lawmakers right now are feeling pretty darned empowered. So just remember to keep your cool like Jay did. And Jay made a number of arguments that were really important. She kept pushing. When I was trying to shut her down, she kept pushing over and over. And that was really important. Some of the arguments that Jay made, recapitulate really quickly. How did you try to take, I came at you saying, you know, no, 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 non-citizens, we don't want non-citizens voting. The first thing you didn't do is you didn't come out saying, that's a myth, you believe a myth. You took a different approach. Say a little bit more about why you took the approach you did.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we try to do when we do Capitol Hill visits is we understand that our values aren't necessarily the same as the representatives' values, but we try to echo the values that we think we do share in order to push them in the right direction, right? You're not going to always be able to move a Republican who's already signed on to a bill, but a Republican does care about perhaps Christians in his district who have strong values, who have a strong community, and who are citizens who are going to be affected by this. So it may not be aligned with your values to focus on those elements, but it's something that might be more relatable or more interesting to him and more a constituency he's more interested in being responsive to.
I think that's great. The other piece is when I said, I'm not likely to withdraw my co-sponsorship of this. You didn't let me off the hook. You kept pushing around it and changed it into, have you talked to Republican members of the House that you know, people that are part of your party that have concerns? That's a really great, if you can do that, that is excellent, because they're always caucusing together. Most of them know the positions, but every so often they're not really talking to each other. And that is a current rift. So you made the most of that. And then when I tried to usher you out of the office, you came back quickly with your final closing remarks, so that when I left that meeting, what I was thinking about is, this is a young woman who's not giving up. This bill is affecting married women, and they're people that are people of faith in my constituency that are on another side of this from me. So those are some things. I'm looking in the quotes. Can we I'm seeing, making sure that we're getting to all the questions. Andrea, let me bring you into this for just a minute. Other thoughts that you might add on making a visit?
Well, one of the things about making a visit is I always tell people, bring a letter, or if you're visiting on Zoom, send a letter. And that letter should have three things on it. Number one, if there is a bill number and a name, be sure to get the bill number by the middle. Well, who knows? We're going to see a lot of legislation this year and in this session. So you need to make sure that the member knows exactly what bill you're talking about. Also, make it very clear. Do you want them to support passage, or do you want them to oppose the bill? You never want the member getting your letter and going, okay, yeah, I knew there was a bill. What do they want me to do? Are they for it or are they against it? And then bullet points as to why they should support or oppose. And as I said in the chat, we always began our letters, and we always wrote our letters as a group, because we were a national organization, as voters in your district.
Exactly. It's so important. And I'm seeing a question from Samia Rashid, who says, can you give advice for people who don't have a commonality to fall upon with their lawmaker? Explaining, I'm a visible minority and not a Christian in Kansas, so there's a level of dismissal of my voice at baseline that I'm worried about. And that can be true for any one of us on any number of issues. I think one of the most important, there's two thoughts that come to my mind, and let me open it up also to Andrea and Jay to respond. Number one, let's go back to what Andrea was just saying about bringing a letter with you. If you can get additional signatures on that letter, it is no longer you alone, but it's you together with others. And that shows power. And lawmakers respond to power. The second thing is that who you are and the values you hold are your strongest possible case. Now, others may not share them, they may disagree, but when you're able to articulate that clearly, and you can practice, before you go in, you have a friend, practice with a friend. This is what I'm going to say, try out a little role play, try it in front of a mirror. Feel comfortable about what you're doing. But when you speak from your values in your own voice, that is always the best possible case you can make. Don't worry about whether it's agreed with on the other end. When you do it that way, there's a level of respect, even if it's begrudging respect that you'll get.
And
Andrew, yeah.
thing. I mentioned this in the chat in response to a question, but one other power you have is bringing in influencers in your community. So there are folks in your community who your elected officials probably look to as representatives of a greater constituency. And those can be clergy leaders like rabbis or pastors, but they can also be local elected officials like mayors or commissioners, or even a local principal, school principal. And if any of those members of your community feel strongly about this, understand how it will affect maybe their students or their the folks at their church or their synagogue, then you can get them in on board. And those are also really influential voices that will be more likely to get the attention of a legislator.
Absolutely.
And frequently I would bring in, I had a number of friends who were veterans. So frequently I would bring in veterans. Before this current administration, it was always veterans. It would be faith leaders, probably followed by electeds, followed by veterans in terms of the hierarchy of respect you would get from an elected member of Congress, even if they really didn't know you. Because veterans hang out at the VA and they know a bunch of other veterans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're nearing the end of our time together. So what I want to assure all of you, first of all, you are going to get a follow-up email. And in that follow-up email will be a recording so that you can revisit parts of the presentation. You can share it with others. Number two, you will have the slides so that you can take a look at what were the components of the Virginia amendments we were talking about. I can't quite remember. It's all going to be there. You are going to be sent talking points on the SAVE Act that you can customize, whether it's for an op-ed or whether it's for putting together a letter for your legislative visit. So we're not going to leave you bereft. You will be well equipped, and Andrea will also be sure to include information about Bill Track 50, because I know a lot of you are very eager to be right up front, be there in advance, looking and watching at what is breaking in your state and in the federal government. There's a couple programs that are coming up next week that we wanted to make a special invite for you to join. Next Thursday, January 30th, is going to be a big night for the Workers' Circle and also for the Center for Common Ground. From 7 to 8 with the Workers' Circle and Center for Common Ground, you'll get the opportunity to learn how to build power in your community by starting a democracy circle, a small group of people that meets regularly to take action together and to learn together. This is a very powerful model. There's democracy circles underway all over the country. Here's a great chance for you to learn about it. And right after it, immediately following, we're going to go right to the Center for Common Ground's update on the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, because we're going to be starting postcarding, right, Andrea? That's coming up?
January 31st, Wisconsin Supreme Court postcards launch.
Exactly. And then on Friday, February 7th, we have First Fridays. You are all welcome. The Workers' Circle hosts this from 12 to 1 o'clock. The first half hour is a structured half hour where you get to meet other people and discuss legislative priorities together. And then the second half is for open exchange. It's a warm and intelligent community. You are so very welcome. And then we do hope you'll join us next month, next Thursday, February 20th from 7 to 8 for how to be effective advocate in your hometown. We will have new information for you, a new federal focus. We'll have some more skills building for you. And we hope that between now and then, you're taking heart from knowing you are not alone. There are people across this country right now, just like you, that are doing the hard and constant work of strengthening our democracy. We are so grateful that you've come with us tonight, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of the evening, that you'll look for that email that's going to be coming to you, and we can't wait to hear from you about how your visits and efforts are going. So with that, I'm going to say goodnight for the Worker Circle. And Andrea, any last words?
Make sure you go and visit your electeds, not once, but make it something that you do continuously, because it's all about building the relationship. When I was on the Hill in my last years, I could get Republicans to sponsor bills that were put in by Democrats faster than I could get Democrats on bills sponsored by other Democrats. It was the relationship that we had built.
Okay, so we're going to be thinking about the relationships that we build with our elected leaders and the relationships we build in our communities. And we will see you back next month, if not sooner, at some of these other programs for Effective Advocate. On behalf of the Worker Circle and Center for Common Ground, good night, take care, and we look forward to seeing you on the front lines. Bye, everybody.
Take care, everybody.